20 years ago, I married Sarah. She was the love of my life, or at least I thought so then. We were that couple people envied, the kind that seemed to have it all together. I worked a stable job as a project manager, and she climbed the ranks in finance. 2 kids followed. Josh, our firstborn, who loved tinkering with machines, and Emily, our wild-hearted daughter who lit up every room she entered. She had this way of laughing, like the whole world was some kind of inside joke only she understood. For years, I genuinely thought I was living the dream. The 4 of us had routines, traditions. Saturday mornings meant pancakes. All of us crammed into the kitchen, the smell of syrup mixing with laughter. Summers were for road trips. Just throw everything in the trunk and drive until the gas ran out. Sarah would sit in the passenger seat, humming along to old tunes while Emily and Josh argued over snacks in the back. I don't tell you this to make you jealous. I tell you this so you understand what I lost. It was a rainy Tuesday when the phone call came. I still remember how the world felt frozen. The hum of my office computer louder than usual, as if life itself was holding its breath. It was an accident. Emily had been riding her bike home from school when a distracted driver ran a stop sign. My wife and I didn't scream or wail at first. Grief starts small. A quiet gasp of air you can't let go of. We clung to each other that night, wordless, as if hoping our silence could undo the truth. For a while, it even seemed like we'd make it through together. But grief changes people. At first, the cracks were small. Arguments about things that didn't matter, who forgot to take the trash out, why dinner was late. I started staying longer at work because home felt heavy, like the walls were pressing in. Sarah was quieter, too. She didn't cry as much as I did. Instead, she threw herself into her job, working later, staying out even after her shift ended. I told myself it was her way of coping. I should have seen the signs. But you don't go looking for monsters when you're too busy fighting your own. In the months after Emily's death, the house grew quieter, though not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of silence that gnawed at you, making every sound, footsteps, doors closing, feel like an intrusion. I'd sometimes stand outside her empty bedroom, hand on the doorknob, unable to open it. Meanwhile, Sarah had started to change. At first, I thought it was just her way of dealing with grief. She worked late, later than ever. There were evenings when she wouldn't get home until after midnight. Her excuse always the same: deadlines at the office. I didn't question it. How could I? We were both clinging to whatever scraps of normalcy we could find. Then there were the fights. It would start with something small. I'd say the wrong thing, maybe ask her if she could take a night off work to spend time with Josh and me. She'd snap, her voice sharp as glass. "You think sitting around this house is going to fix anything?" She spat once, slamming a cupboard door so hard the glass inside rattled. I bit my tongue. What was I supposed to say? Josh, my boy, my little shadow who used to follow me around the garage, asking questions about engines and tools, started retreating too. He spent more time in his room with headphones on. I'd knock on his door and get short answers. "Yeah, I'm fine, Dad. Just tired." But I knew better. My son was drifting, and I didn't know how to pull him back. One Friday night, I was fixing dinner for just the 2 of us. Spaghetti and Jared sauce because that's all I could muster. Sarah had texted earlier. "Working late. Don't wait up. Josh, dinner's ready." I called. He didn't answer, so I walked down the hallway to his room. I didn't even knock. I just opened the door, and what I saw nearly stopped my heart. He was sitting at his desk, staring at a picture of Emily on his computer screen. It was a photo from last summer, a road trip we took to the lake. She was standing on the shore, her hair blowing in the wind, smiling that big, gap-toothed grin. When Josh turned and saw me, he quickly minimized the screen. "Sorry, Dad. You don't have to apologize," I said softly, stepping into the room. He looked at me, his eyes wet. "Do you think Mom even cares anymore? About us? About Em?" His words hit like a gut punch. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that Sarah was just trying to keep herself busy. But the truth was I didn't know anymore. That night, as I lay in bed alone, Sarah still at work, I started to feel it, the quiet whisper of doubt. A voice I'd been ignoring for months. "Something's not right. I tried to silence it. Tried to convince myself Sarah was just grieving differently. But when she finally stumbled through the door at 1 a.m., her coat smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't hers and her lipstick smudged, I felt it again. Something wasn't right. And I was about to find out how wrong I'd been. That night, when Sarah came home at 1 a.m., I lay there pretending to be asleep. I could hear her moving around, her heels clicking against the hardwood, the sound of her coat being tossed on the chair. I thought about that faint smell of perfume, the one I didn't recognize. I'd never been the jealous type, but something about it itched in the back of my mind. The next morning I brought it up carefully. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the coffee between us already cold. "You were pretty late last night," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Yeah," she replied, not looking up from her phone. "The accounting department is a mess right now. You wouldn't believe it." "And the perfume?" I asked, pretending to be casual. She paused, her thumb hovering over the screen. "What perfume?" "The one on your coat." For a moment, her face didn't move. It was like she was frozen, calculating something in her head. Then she forced a smile, so fake it almost hurt to look at. "Oh, that. One of the girls hugged me when she was leaving. You know how they are, drench themselves in that stuff." She laughed, but her eyes didn't. Something in my gut twisted. It wasn't her words. It was the way she said them. Too smooth, too practiced, like she'd already rehearsed the line before I even asked. I let it go, or at least I pretended to. The following weeks were a blur of tension and suspicion. Sarah's late nights became even more frequent, and she grew distant, almost indifferent. She didn't argue with me anymore. Didn't engage at all. We were living as strangers under the same roof. One night, I decided to confront it head-on. Josh was at a friend's house for the weekend, and I waited for Sarah to come home. Midnight turned to 1 a.m., then 2. When the door finally creaked open, I was sitting in the dark living room. The glow from the hallway light spilled across me as she froze in the doorway, startled to see me awake. "You're up," she said flatly.
Esther here.
"Where were you?" Her expression hardened. "Work. At 2 in the morning? Really, Sarah?" My voice cracked a little. I wasn't yelling, but the pain was there. She dropped her bag on the floor and sighed. "Oh my God. Not this again. Why do you keep doing this? Do you think I want to be working this much? Stop lying to me." I finally snapped. "You think I'm an idiot? I know something's going on." Sarah's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, she looked angry. Not guilty, not sad, angry. "You want to know what's going on? Fine. I can't breathe in this house anymore. Okay? I can't look at you or Josh, or—" She choked on her words. "I can't look at anything without thinking about Emily. And you? You just sit here, acting like you're the only one who's broken." Her words stunned me. For a moment, I couldn't say anything. "You think you're the only one hurting?" I finally asked, my voice shaking. "She was my daughter too, Sarah. And instead of trying to get through this together, you're just leaving us." She didn't answer. Instead, she picked up her bag and walked straight to our bedroom. I sat there in the dark for what felt like hours, staring at nothing. A few days later, I did something I never thought I'd do. I went through her phone. Sarah had always been protective of it. She took it with her everywhere, even into the bathroom. That morning, though, she left it charging on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower. My hands were shaking as I picked it up. First, there was nothing. Emails, texts to coworkers, things I'd expect. But then I saw it. A thread of messages to a name I didn't recognize. Ethan. The text started harmless enough, but as I scrolled, my chest tightened. "Last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about you. When can I see you again? Same place this weekend. I miss you. I wish I didn't have to go home." And the worst one, the one that made my vision blur. "I haven't felt this alive in years." I put the phone down, my breathing shallow. My world was tilting. I felt sick, like I might throw up right there in the kitchen. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break something, to confront her, to demand answers. But instead, I just stood there, staring at the counter, My fists clenched so hard they shook. I don't know how long I stood like that, but eventually, I heard Sarah's voice from down the hall. "Hey, have you seen my—" She stopped when she saw me holding her phone. "What's this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Her face drained of color. For the first time in months, I saw real panic in her eyes. "Where did you find that?" she whispered back. "You left it out," I said. "Who's Ethan, Sarah?" She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The silence said enough. The silence after my question felt heavy, like the whole house was holding its breath. Sarah stood there, her damp hair falling around her shoulders, clutching the edge of the doorframe like she needed it to hold herself up. "Who's Ethan, Sarah?" I asked again, louder this time. She didn't answer. Instead, she looked at me like I was a stranger, like I was the one who had done something wrong. "Say something," I pressed. My voice cracked, but I didn't care. "Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me I'm imagining this." She finally took a deep breath, her voice so calm it made my skin crawl. "I don't owe you an explanation." The words hit like a slap. "You don't owe me? I'm your husband, Sarah. What do you mean you don't owe me anything? You've been sneaking around, lying to me for God knows how long, and now you don't owe me an explanation." "Stop yelling," she snapped, her voice sharp. "Josh will hear you." Her words only made me angrier. "You think I care about that right now? You've been lying to me, to him, to us. Was it worth it? Is he worth it?" Sarah flinched, but she didn't deny it. She just turned away, her voice low. "This isn't about him." "Oh, don't give me that," I shouted. "I read the messages, Sarah. Last night was amazing. I wish I didn't have to go home." That sounds pretty damn clear to me. She turned to look at me, her eyes glassy. "You don't understand, Mike. You don't know what it's like to be me. To wake up every day and feel nothing. To walk through this house and feel like I can't breathe. He made me feel alive again. There it was. The knife, buried deep. Alive. Like I wasn't enough. Like Josh wasn't enough. Like the life we built together, with all its cracks and flaws, meant nothing anymore." I stared at her, unable to speak. My hands shook as I gripped the back of a kitchen chair, trying to steady myself. "And what about me? What about Josh? Do you even think about him? Do you think about what this will do to him?" Her expression crumpled for a second, but then she hardened again. "Don't put this on me. You checked out of this marriage months ago. You buried yourself in work and left me here alone to pick up the pieces. You act like I'm the only one who did something wrong. But you've been gone, too." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're blaming me for this? I'm saying you're not innocent." I stared at her for a long time, my mind racing, trying to find the woman I used to know somewhere in those cold, distant eyes. But I couldn't. She was gone. Or maybe she'd been gone for a long time, and I just hadn't wanted to see it. Finally, I let go of the chair and stepped back. "I can't do this right now. Mike, don't." I cut her off, shaking my head. "I need time. I need space." I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, leaving her standing there in the kitchen, frozen. I don't remember where I drove that day. I just remember the feeling, the numbness spreading through me, the dull ache in my chest. I ended up at an empty parking lot near the park where we used to take the kids. I sat in the car, staring out at the playground, my mind a mess of noise. How had we ended up here? We used to be happy. I know we were happy. Sure, life wasn't perfect, but we had something real. Or at least I thought we did. At some point, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and saw Josh's name. "Where are you?" "Mom's acting weird." I didn't know what to say. How do you tell your kid that everything they thought was solid is about to collapse? I didn't answer. Instead, I sat there until the sun went down, the car growing colder as the hours passed. The numbness was gone by then. In its place was something darker, something I hadn't felt in years. Anger. If she thought she could just walk away from us, from me, and start over, she was wrong. I started the engine, gripped the steering wheel tight, and headed home. I didn't know what came next, but one thing was certain. I wasn't letting Sarah get away with this. When I pulled into the driveway that night, the house looked dark, quiet, almost lifeless. For a second, I just sat there, my hands still gripping the steering wheel, staring at the shadowy windows like the house itself was mocking me. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, gone. I walked inside, the door creaking louder than usual. Josh's bedroom door was closed, light spilling out from under it. I didn't want to disturb him. I didn't have the words yet. Sarah was in the living room, sitting on the couch with a blanket draped over her shoulders. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes tired and bloodshot. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, staring at her like she was a stranger. "You didn't come back all day," she said softly. "You noticed." I shot back. The bitterness in my voice startled even me. She winced, but she didn't respond. I dropped my keys on the table and stood there for a long moment. Finally, I spoke, my voice cold and steady. "How long?" Sarah swallowed hard. "Does it matter?" "Yes," I said through gritted teeth. "It matters." She looked down at her hands, picking at the edge of the blanket. "A few months." I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. I turned away from her, my fists clenched. "Months?" I repeated under my breath. "Months." I heard her stand up. "Mike, Don't," I snapped, spinning around to face her. "Don't you dare say you're sorry. You're not. You're sorry you got caught." Sarah didn't deny it. She just looked at me with that same hollow expression I'd come to hate. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said after a while. "Yeah, and yet it did." I shook my head. "Who is he?" "Ethan." "Who the hell is he?" She hesitated, and for a moment I thought she wasn't going to answer. But then she said quietly, "Someone from work, of course. It started small," she continued. "Talking after meetings, grabbing coffee. I didn't think anything of it. But then, I don't know. He understood me, Mike. He listened. He didn't look at me like I was broken." Her words stung, but what hurt more was the way she said them. Like she was justifying it to herself as much as to me. "And what about Josh?" I asked, my voice low. "Does he understand? Does he listen?" Sarah's face crumpled. "I never wanted this to happen. I never wanted to hurt him." I stared at her for a long moment, trying to find something, anything, left of the woman I married. But I couldn't. Maybe I was broken, too, because I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just felt empty. "I can't do this," I said finally. "Mike." "No," I held up a hand. "You made your choice. I hope Ethan was worth it." I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her standing there in the dark. The next morning, I woke up on the couch. My back ached, and for a moment I forgot why I was there. Then it all came rushing back. I could hear Sarah in the kitchen, moving quietly, probably trying not to wake Josh. The sound made my skin crawl. Before I could think too much about it, I grabbed my phone and called someone I hadn't spoken to in a long time. My old college buddy, Tom. He was the kind of friend you lose touch with when life gets busy. But you know he'd still pick up the phone if you needed him. "Mike? Hey man, what's going on?" he answered, his voice groggy. "Can I crash at your place for a while?" I asked. I need to get out of here." There was a pause. "Yeah, of course. Is everything okay?" "Not really," I admitted. "I'll explain when I get there." I hung up and stood. The thought of packing my things and leaving made my stomach turn, but staying felt worse. I wasn't going to spend another minute in this house, pretending everything was fine. As I grabbed a bag and started throwing clothes into it, I heard footsteps behind me. "Where are you going?" Sarah's voice was soft, but I could hear the panic in it. "I'm leaving," I said without turning around. "For how long?" "I don't know." I zipped up the bag and turned to face her. "But I can't be here, Sarah. Not with you." "What about Josh?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You're just going to leave him here?" I felt my jaw tighten. "You've already done enough damage to this family. Don't you dare act like you care now." She flinched like I'd hit her. "Good." I slung the bag over my shoulder and walked past her. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I just kept walking. As I closed the front door behind me, I realized something. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a whole new kind of hell. I didn't go far at first. Tom lived in a small apartment across town, barely furnished except for a sagging couch and a TV mounted at an awkward angle. It wasn't home, but it was better than suffocating in that house. The first night, I sat on the edge of Tom's couch while he handed me a beer. "You gonna tell me what's going on?" he asked, sitting across from me, his face lined with concern. I took a sip and stared at the floor, trying to find the words. "Sarah's been cheating on me." Tom swore under his breath, shaking his head. "Sarah? No way. You sure?" I laughed bitterly. "Pretty damn sure. I saw the messages. She's been sneaking around for months." He didn't say anything for a moment, probably realizing there wasn't much to say. I didn't need sympathy. I needed time to wrap my head around it. "What about Josh?" Tom asked finally. "He's at home. I don't know how I'm going to tell him. Hell, I don't even know how I'm supposed to look at him without falling apart." Tom didn't push me for more. He just sat there, handing me another beer when the first one ran out, and for the first time in days I felt like I could breathe. The next morning, I woke up groggy on the couch to the sound of my phone vibrating on the coffee table. When I picked it up, I saw a string of missed calls from Sarah. Good, I thought. Let her panic. But the last call wasn't from her. It was from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me pick up. "Hello." A pause. Then, a man's voice, calm and familiar. "Mike, it's Ethan." The name made my blood run cold. My grip on the phone tightened. "How the hell did you get my number?" "That doesn't matter," he said smoothly. "I think we need to talk." "Talk?" I barked out a humorless laugh. "You think I want to hear anything you have to say?" "You should," he replied. "Because there's a lot you don't know about Sarah." I froze. "What are you talking about?" "Meet me," Ethan said. "I'll explain everything." Everything in me told me to hang up, that this was some sick game. But then I thought about Sarah's lies, her late nights, the way she looked at me like I was nothing. And I needed to know. "Where?" I asked. He gave me the name of a diner on the edge of town. "An hour. Don't bring Sarah." When I got to the diner, I spotted him right away. Ethan was sitting in a booth near the window, dressed in a pressed shirt like he'd just come from work. He looked younger than me, maybe mid-30s, with the kind of confidence that made my skin crawl. I walked over and sat across from him, my hands balled into fists. "Talk." Ethan studied me for a moment before speaking. "I'm not going to sit here and justify what happened between Sarah and me. You don't want to hear that, and I don't blame you." "You're right. I don't," I said through gritted teeth. "But you need to know something," he continued, his voice even. "Sarah hasn't been honest with you about a lot of things." I frowned. "What the hell does that mean?" Ethan leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Do you know where Sarah goes when she's not at work?" The question made my stomach turn. "She's with you, isn't she?" "Not always," he said. "She's been meeting someone else. Someone who's not me." My mind reeled. "What are you talking about?" "You're lying." "I'm not," Ethan replied calmly. "I started seeing Sarah months ago, yes, but a few weeks ago, I noticed she was pulling away. I confronted her about it and she admitted she was involved with someone else too. I ended things after that. I didn't sign up to be one of many." My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. "You're saying she's cheating on you too?" He nodded. "That's why I called you. I thought you deserved to know. Whatever Sarah's caught up in, it's bigger than either of us." I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. Sarah wasn't just having an affair. She was living some double life I didn't even recognize. My wife, the mother of my kids, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, was a stranger. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked finally. Ethan shrugged. "Maybe I feel guilty. Maybe I want her to face the consequences of what she's done. Either way, it's your problem now." I didn't say another word. I stood up and walked out of the diner, my mind spinning. Back at Tom's apartment, I sat on the couch, staring at the wall. Sarah was cheating on me with two men? How? Why? The woman who'd once laughed in the kitchen making pancakes was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Sarah. Mike, we need to talk. Please come home. I stared at the screen. My hands trembled as anger bubbled up inside me. She wants to talk? Fine. I was done sitting in the dark. I grabbed my keys, stormed out of the apartment, and headed back to the house. I didn't know what I was going to say to her when I got there, but I knew one thing for sure. I was going to get answers. No more lies. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same as always. A little worn, a little weathered, but familiar. I sat in the car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel as the engine ticked off, the silence feeling like a countdown. Sarah's car was in its usual spot, but nothing about this felt usual anymore. I walked in through the front door without knocking, as if I still had some right to be there. Sarah was sitting at the kitchen table, a coffee cup in her hands. When she looked up at me, I saw something new in her face. Fear. Not guilt. Not anger. Fear. You came back, she said quietly. I tossed my keys onto the counter, the sound echoing too loudly. You wanted to talk. So talk. She hesitated, staring into the coffee like it held the answers. Mike, I never wanted things to turn out this way. Spare me. I shot back. Ethan told me everything. About the affair. About how you've been seeing someone else behind his back too. What the hell is going on with you? Sarah? What are you doing? Her head snapped up, and I saw panic flash across her face. You talked to Ethan? Yeah, I said, crossing my arms. So who's the other guy, huh? How deep does this mess go? Sarah shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. It's not what you think. Then what is it? I demanded. You've been lying to me, to our son, to yourself. You keep telling me I don't understand. So explain it, Sarah. Make me understand. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, but no words came. Finally, she slumped forward, her shoulders shaking as she started to cry. It wasn't the composed, stoic Sarah I was used to seeing. This was broken, raw. I didn't want to tell you, she choked out. I didn't want you to hate me even more. Hate you? My voice softened just a fraction. Sarah, I don't even know who you are anymore. She wiped her eyes, breathing hard. The other guy, he's not who you think. He's not another man. I blinked. What? It's a loan shark, she whispered. The words hung in the air like smoke, taking a moment to sink in. A loan shark, I repeated, stunned. Sarah nodded. After we lost her, I couldn't cope. I started drinking, gambling online, anything to numb the pain. First, it was small bets, then bigger ones. I thought I could win it back, but I kept digging myself deeper. I owe tens of thousands now, Mike. I was desperate. Ethan? She looked away. Ethan helped me get through it at first, but then even that wasn't enough. I borrowed money from people I shouldn't have. I sank into a chair, trying to process her words. Jesus, Sarah. I didn't know how to stop, she continued, her voice hollow. The other guy, the loan shark, he's been threatening me. Threatening us. I've been trying to work extra hours to pay him back. But it's not enough. That's why I've been so distant. That's why I've been staying late. I didn't tell you because I knew you'd hate me for what I'd done. For a moment, the room felt like it was spinning. My anger, my betrayal, all of it tangled into something I couldn't describe. Sarah had blown up our lives not because she didn't love us, but because she was drowning. And instead of reaching for me, she reached for the wrong things, the wrong people. Why didn't you come to me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. Because I thought you'd see me the way you do now, as a failure. I ran my hands over my face, trying to think. None of this excused what she'd done, the lies, the cheating, but for the first time I saw the truth underneath. Sarah wasn't just betraying us. She was running from herself. Does Josh know? I asked suddenly. No, she whispered. And he can't. Please, Mike. He can't know. I let out a long, shaky breath, feeling the weight of everything crashing down at once. Our marriage was over. I knew that. But Josh didn't deserve to be dragged into this chaos. Here's what we're going to do, I said finally. You're going to come clean to me about everything. Every cent you owe, every person you borrowed from. And we're going to figure out how to fix this mess. Sarah nodded, wiping her tears. Thank you, Mike. Don't, I said sharply. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for Josh. He's the only thing that matters now. Sarah looked down, ashamed, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had some control again. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The weeks that followed were a blur of damage control. Sarah laid it all out. The gambling debts, the threats, the late-night meetings with loan sharks who didn't care that she was a grieving mother. I hated her for what she'd done, but at the same time I couldn't abandon her. Not yet. Together, we scraped together what we could. I sold my old car. Sarah drained what little savings she had, and we put a small dent in the debt. It wasn't enough, but it bought us time. In the middle of it all, Josh started asking questions. Why are you and Mom fighting so much? Why are you sleeping at Uncle Tom's? I didn't have the heart to tell him the full truth, so I gave him half of it. Your mom and I are trying to figure some things out, I said one night as I tucked him in. It's hard, but we're going to be okay. He nodded, his face too serious for a kid his age. I miss Emily, he whispered. Me too, buddy, I said, my chest tightening. Me too. Over time, Sarah and I reached an unspoken agreement. We would get through the debt together, but that was it. Once the dust settled, we'd go our separate ways. The marriage was beyond repair. Months later, the final payment was made. Sarah moved into a small apartment across town, and I stayed in the house with Josh. We kept it simple, no dramatic fights, no bitter court battles. Just two people quietly letting go of a life that had already died a long time ago. One afternoon, as I was clearing out some boxes from the garage, I found an old photo album. It was filled with pictures of us, me, Sarah, Josh, and Emily. Road trips, birthdays, pancake mornings. For a moment, I let myself remember what it was like to be happy, to be whole. Josh walked in and sat beside me, looking over my shoulder. I miss this, he said softly. Me too, I replied, pulling him into a hug. I don't know what the future holds. Sarah and I speak occasionally, mostly about Josh. She's still finding her footing, and so am I. The pain hasn't disappeared, but it's quieter now, like a scar instead of an open wound. Sometimes, life doesn't give you the ending you want. But if you're lucky, it gives you a second chance to start over. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do. Thank you for experiencing this with me. Subscribe to the channel to not miss new stories.